Welcome back to the drawing board. I am so very excited that I made it to 100 subscribers in 56 days, and that's just the beginning. To celebrate that, I am going back to my very first video where I talked about the loan caps for students who are majoring in architecture because the federal government declassify it from a professional degree, which is concerning. So today I've brought in a guest to talk about that, and I'm super excited. His name is Dr. Kendall Nicholson. He is a licensed educator, trained architectural designer, and an avid researcher. He works as the Senior Director of Research, Equity, and Education at the Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture, which we affectionately call the ACSA. With degrees in architecture, real estate, and education, his research explores the discipline of architecture through the lens of a social scientist. He has presented research internationally, and his research interests surround equity, education, and curriculum within the design of architecture. Does that sound familiar? So I would like to let you know that Dr. Nicholson is part of our dear friend community, and I've known him for many years, and I'm very excited to have him lend his expertise to Black to the Drawing Board. Thank you, Dr. Nicholson, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, I want to go to some significant questions because the architecture community is up in arms about this declassification. We're the profession that is responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of human occupants of all buildings. And it's quite concerning that all of a sudden it's not a profession, like it's not a professional degree. And that limits loans that our students are able to get. And I work at an HBCU, and that's a little bit more significant for the population that we serve because many of them are first generation college students, non-traditional students, historically marginalized students. So I'm going to just jump right in with a couple of questions and you can clarify those based on your research. How's that?
Sounds great.
Thank you. All right. The ACSA fact sheet and related materials indicate that the One Big so-called Beautiful Bill Act will cap graduate students' borrowing at $20,500 per year and $100,000 aggregate for the entirety of the architectural education, unless architecture is designated as a professional degree, which it is not anymore. But I've heard mixed interpretations of how this actually plays out. Could you clarify that for us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I think this is what makes the news, and this is what people click on. And I think in refining and redefining the professional degrees, the the federal government left out architecture. They left out other disciplines like nursing, engineering, we weren't alone in being left out. The real issue here is that when we look at the research that we have and the research that AIA has around student loan debt, the average, I think, of student loan debt is around $53,000 for architecture students. And this is upon graduation. Oftentimes, this includes some undergraduate study, and the loan cap that they've put on for architecture, being just the graduate student, not the professional degree loan cap. The graduate student loan cap is $100,000 in totality, or like you said, $20,500 per year. Now, we're going to see that play out differently for different students and different student bodies. I think on the surface, the the restriction of professional degree is a nomenclature issue where it's in some ways a smack in the face, right? Like you all are not professional, but the way in which they've thought about professional degrees are degrees that have even larger debt, average indebtedness for students, which is why you see law and you see medicine. Now, I think, and let me know if I'm jumping ahead too much, but I think one of the major issues out of this new administration and the implication on higher ed is actually the grad plus loans. The grad plus loans are going to have the biggest impact on students because grad plus loans are supposed to meet the gap between what the total cost of tuition is and what the total cost of attendance is. And so if the total cost of attendance is, let's say, 30,000. So that includes room, books, board, room and board, books, your tuition, all of the other things that students need to be able to thrive in a learning environment, and the federal government says you can only borrow 20,500, then you've got almost $10,000 that you need to figure out how you're going to come up with, whether that's through work, whether that's through, some people have family that can give them that money, whether that's through private loans, which oftentimes have higher interest rates. So that grad plus loan is going to be where the rubber meets the road for a lot of students who are trying to study architecture.
Thank you for that. My question back to you is you mentioned the average cost of the totality of learning architecture, which is
Of
typically
student debt.
right, the student debt is typically um, a 5-year program, right? And so if I have a student who is dependent upon loans to get them through their education, that average that you gave is for 1 year at a private institution, such as the one where I work. So what do you say to those students? Because it's almost like who can afford to be an architect now? And and
Yes.
and you know, we're always I don't want to generalize, but I'm going to say me as a Black woman is always looking for the catch. Like, let me look at this closely. And what it appears to be from my perspective as a Black female architect is the government trying to determine who can afford to be trained as a licensed professional architect.
Yeah, I think for the government, I mean I have a lot of thoughts about the government, but what I'll say here is I think for the government, um, they are not necessarily looking at the long-term impact. They're looking at the short-term uh parameters that will last for another 2 or so years, as it relates to the cost of higher education. So I've not yet met a person that says the cost of higher education is super low, right? Like it's
Like,
understood
it's
that it
not, it's
costs, yeah,
not.
it costs, it's expensive.
That's
But
right.
putting caps on students is not what's going to drive the cost of education down. And that's where the mismatch is, at least in my opinion. Um, yeah, that's where the mismatch is because if the average student is borrowing, let's say on average, 53, $52,000 across the span of their architecture degree, um, you and I both know that Black and brown students are oftentimes borrowing much more.
Exactly. That was my concern. And speaking of, that leads me to my next question. Given your research focus on equity, architectural education, I'd like your insight on how these loan changes will differentially impact students at HBCUs, underrepresented backgrounds, especially Black students, compared with students who might be able to self-finance or access savings or family support. We all know that there is a disparity in equity and equality in America. So specifically, how do you see the reduced federal loan limits interacting with existing racial and economic disparities?
Yeah, so we see both in data that dates back to 2018. We did a I was the lead researcher on the Equity and Architecture Survey, which surveyed over 14,000 people who had an architecture degree, most of them working in architecture and some of them working in related fields like construction, real estate, um, interiors, or urban design. But
Mhm.
when we surveyed that group, one of the things that came out, this is back in 2018, is that when we looked at um, degree type and average student debt, we found that Black men and Black women with MArch degrees um, were significantly above what the average was, which at that point in 2018, the average was around 41 or 42. For Black men and women, it was closer to 90. And so if we understand the history of harm and systemic racism, then we understand why it is that Black and Brown communities often need to borrow more funds to be able to attain a college degree. So we saw that in 2018, and we saw that again. AIA did a research study in 2022 that also said the same thing. They looked at the borrowing habits, so to speak, or total student indebtedness for for their AIA members, for female versus male members, and BIPOC versus white members, and BIPOC members and female members um, had a significant borrowed significantly more funds to meet their education demands. And so the issue with that is if we continue to perpetuate and or limit who has access to the profession and getting an architecture degree, then we're reinforcing many of the ways in which communities have been harmed and limited economically in the past, right? Um,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And one of the things I learned from you, I knew it, but you gave me the actual statistic about 80% of all of the licensed architects that are Black graduated from HBCUs. And so I feel like this disparity that you just talked about is going to change the face of the profession and what it looks like when we're really already trying to um, even the playing field or even get our foot in the door. Like our big toe may be in the door, but we're trying to get our entire foot in the door. And I think this is going to make us lose traction with the gains that we've already made.
Yeah, it's really hard. I think current students pursuing higher education are trying to manage a lot of things, right? It's not just the cost, it's location, it's the type of program, right? And what the requirements are. Many students that I know, at least, and I'm sure this is the case for your students um, as well, is they're working. They're working to try to make
All
sure
the
they have
time.
gas
Yes.
and food, and
Yes.
some are sending money home or things home for family.
Yes.
And so this really, that grad plus, the elimination of grad plus loans really is going to have a detrimental impact on students, and it's going to impact Black and Brown students more because the research says it, and we know it. Both of us lived it, right?
That's right. Well, I am one that doesn't want to always harp on doom and gloom because I know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. So I'd like to throw a positive question to you on institutional and policy solutions. Your involvement with ACSA advocacy and research community and specific policy is very meaningful. So I want to give you an opportunity to discuss how you counteract these negative effects and what people like myself in higher ed and other licensed architects can do to move this discussion in a better way. I don't believe we should all just sit back and say, oh, we got 2.5 more years or
Yeah.
whatever the amount is. What can we do now, and what have you already been doing with ACSA?
Yeah, so ACSA has been active in collaboration with AIA, NOMA, AIS, NAB, and NCARB, working through what the negotiated rule making looks like. I'm glad to report that um, the final regulations have come out. So starting January 30th, we'll be able to make comments. I would encourage everybody watching, everybody that you know, to make comments uh, on the proposed rule because right now it's just a proposed rule. Um, I don't know how effective that is. I don't get the impression that this administration is a sit around, hold hands, and listen kind of administration. But I do think it's worth making your voice heard. At the national level, we have been talking with or been in conversation, I guess, with with advocates who are also who work in Congress who are not in support of this this proposed rule. Congressman Lawler out of New York has a bill that that includes architecture. And then Congressman Torres also has a bill. One of them Republican, one of them Democrat. And um, I guess in short, I would say there's things that are happening. I think we all know what works. I think many of us, at least in our discipline in the academy, know what works best for students. And that has got to be the goal, right? We don't want
Right.
education to be exorbitantly expensive that people are stuck with debt for 20, 30, 40 years, but we want them to be able to access resources that others are able to access in a way that's equitable.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That gives us hope. And I'll be sure to make sure that I put the link that you mentioned for public comment in the description so that the viewers for Black to the Drawing Board can like, share, and subscribe, and then go in and um, make their opinions known through that. So I want to thank you for your time this afternoon, and um, I appreciate it. Do you have any final comments that you'd like to share with us about this topic?
I really think, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
I really think that information is key, which is why one of the first things that we did is put together a fact sheet. And so that fact sheet has, you know, verifiable information. We'll continue to send out and share, for you and your viewers, the proposed rule, um, comment period and any additional, I mean, I have meetings tomorrow, I have meetings this afternoon about this. So we're not taking it lying down, so to speak. We're going to keep working and make sure that everybody has access who wants access.
I love that. I'll put the fact sheet in the description as well so people can download it and look at it and learn more information. Here at Black to the Drawing Board, we shine in the light and glow in the dark. And I hope that you come back the next time we sit down at the drawing board.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure.